Yeah, I think you're right. I'm going to expand a bit on what you said about presence, because in all the books I reference a famous psychoanalyst named Andre Green, who spoke about absence and presence. So that's part of the first book is Absent Father. But what the absence is we learn to be absent to ourselves. And our responsibility, you could say, is filling up the absence with our own presence. It's the same thing you said with just different words. So if you're really present, you're not going to feel this tremendous lack that you've got to be filling, that you're anxious and you won't be able to, but you will be working to be in it and feel present. It is not the easiest thing to be present all the time. Most people can't do it, but to be aware of it is so important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an author on the show that I found a post on social media about a book this author wrote. Technically, my wife found it. She sent it over to me. She's like, you got to have this author on your podcast. I do host another show called Dad Space, and this author is going to come back and talk more detail around the book that we originally connected on in relation to fathers. But Susan is here on the podcast. I'm excited to have her on the show. We finally made this happen through technology and all the funs that happens behind the scenes. But we're here together, and I'm so happy to have her here. And for those that can't see Susan in the moment, she's sitting in this beautiful chair. It's like, you feel like you're like back in time, this gorgeous chair. And I'm really excited to have Susan on the podcast. Susan, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you so much for having me. And also thank your wife for finding the book.
There you go, right? It's exciting. Now, Susan, tell everybody before we get too deep here, where are you in this big world?
Actually, I'm in Paradise Valley, Arizona, which is Phoenix. So quite a ways from you, almost diagonal.
Yeah, that's a long flight for me. I was down there several times, and I love Phoenix, Arizona, and all that area. Scottsdale. Oh my gosh, the people are so great, and I love the cactus. Like for a Canadian, I was like, this is amazing to see these big, huge cactus. I put my hand up, and there's like one of the needles was like the size of my hand. I'm like, this is amazing.
Well, you know what? World. I think it relates to a book. It's like you go to something that is different and you get intrigued with it. And so it's like a different surrounding. It's the same thing with a book. It's a different surrounding or a different something. And you go, oh my goodness, what is here? And you open your palm and just like you open the book and you say, whoa, okay, do I want to continue on? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. And when I was down there, I would have I had a car rental, so I could drive around. I was there for business, but in the evenings I had time to go do whatever I want. I'd drive around listening to the radio, and there'd be a new song come on that was on at the time that I was in Phoenix. So every time now going forward, I ever hear that song again, I immediately transport back to that rental car, driving around beautiful Phoenix and the surrounding area, and go, oh, I miss that place. It's just a beautiful place in the world. So, yeah, I'm a little jealous.
At this moment, it's a little too hot for you. I know that. I know that for sure. Yeah. But, I do want to take what you said about your association with the song and place. So one of the things that happens psychologically when you write a book is that you want people to make their own associations to what is written in the book, and you want them to remember as in bring together their own experiences. So if you can do that, then in fact, people say, oh, now I resonate. I get what you're talking about, because it becomes very personal. I didn't write any of the books to have a completely intellectual story, but actually an emotional impact. Like, this is us, or this is where we can relate, not to everything, but certain aspects, I would hope. So we associate unconsciously and bring up good and bad memories, actually. That's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And I've actually, when I read authors that can do that well, I always get
Certainly.
connected with them. Something simple like an author saying, I walked up to the front door of my childhood home, put my hand on the doorknob for the first time since I left, and I opened the door. Now, if I'm going in my childhood home, and I can tell you where it is,
Right.
the street address, I can tell you the color of the door that I remember, where my bedroom was in the house. My story is different than your story. But in that moment, even though we have two different houses that you're thinking about and I'm thinking about as a reader, we're going back in time to that place because the author set the stage for us to experience that moment again, right? And I love how an author can
It
do
is
that.
true, but I also have found that some people will take a memory like that, which looks inviting on the surface, but for them it is not inviting. It's frightening, and it
Right.
brings up difficult memories. And if you can read about it, it helps integrate the difficult memories because you're kind of removed from it, a little bit, and then you can take it in small bites. So then you can eventually open the door to maybe what was not so great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because one experience is going to be different than the
It
other.
always
That's
is.
great.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I love how authors can use words to bring people to those places where they can experience that, whether it's good or bad, but confront or realize that their life is much different today because of, their path.
True. But also, I have found people will tell me that now they can realize what happened, but they also realize they are repeating the past. So they can't get out of it. So when you read, it can help propel you into it and hopefully to get through it. It doesn't with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So, Susan, tell us a little bit about how your journey as an author began. What was the origin for you that said, this is my path in life and this is where I'm going to
Well, I'm an analyst of Jungian psychology, and Jungian analysts quite frequently write. Not all, but many do. And actually, it took me a long time. I'm probably what you would say a later bloomer in the area of writing. So it takes a certain amount of going inward, certain amount of experience. And I've been thinking about this and wishing it had happened earlier that I had written, but also realizing that I'm happy because I have the energy for it and the desire. And so the fire is there. And I just go, okay, now that it's here, I'm doing it. I can't look back and say, I wish it happened earlier. But it has evolved. It's evolved. And even when I sent the book proposal to Routledge the first time, they refused it. Of course, then you learn about all the people who have had their proposals refused, famous ones, all these marvelous people. But several years later, I thought, okay, I'll look at their suggestions and do what they suggested. And it worked. And so, yes, so one book actually led into another, to another, to another, and I hope many more. Each one has got not the same theme, but they repeat certain areas. So I actually accentuate the issue of the father in everything I've written. One, because fathers are not written much about, and we'll go into that on your other podcast. But I found that people's response back, actually men and women, or anybody, is that they can't find much material written about fathers. And of course, when you write out of your own experience. And as an analyst, I wrote out of the experience of seeing different people in my office, all of whom said, not all, is it all? That's a big word. Most all. It's a huge percentage. Never saw him, don't know him, very introverted, never talked, no emotion, no affection. It's quite a dim story. But from them, I learned what was needed as well, to kind of turn things around. That's why one writes. You don't just write to say, it's completely awful and end of story, but how it can be turned around and how you can have hope. So my journey, getting back to your original question, journey as an author has been, again, a rather late one, but one that I've really enjoyed. And you have to kind of like books, you have to like computers and searching and being alone. I mean, because that you don't write in a group really. And thinking and feeling. It really brings up a bunch of feelings, actually.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about the connection between being a reader and being a writer. What's the advantages of being an active reader as you approach your writing?
They, whoever they are, have said, if you're a reader, that's how you learn to write. Mm-hmm. So I have certain of my favorite writers, and I read them, and others as well. Sometimes also quite a bit nonfiction also, because the stories are the stories of life. So I don't know that you can write if you don't like reading, because you have to edit, and you have to have the patience to edit, and you have to want to go over and over your material. So I do think you've got to have a habit and a desire to read, because if you don't, you won't be reading your own material. Yeah. So the fine writers, whoever they are to each person, are the ones really to read. Even the challenging ones, the ones where you have to read that page, 6 or 7 times before you even understand what is said. Those are the ones I like to read, because it's challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a parallel with music. I'm a musician, and I've been doing music for a long time. There are people that I look to in music that inspire me. There's some people that I come across that are way more talented in music than I am. It just seems natural to them, and to me it's an effort. To them it seems like it's nothing to them to be so great at what they do. And in that moment you have a choice. You can either be inspired by someone's ability in music or writing, and that makes you want to do more, like go and practice and get better. But sometimes people get a little intimidated by someone who is really good at something that you might be learning, and that makes you go, you know what, I'm never going to do this because I'll never get to that level, right? So I'm never going to be as successful as them, so maybe I shouldn't, this isn't for me. But in that moment, I think you have a choice.
I think you do too. Right? I really think that if you're going to look at whatever you like doing, and say writing, reading, and you are intimidated by somebody else who looks like it's easy. But I've read about a lot of writers. There's hardly any that say it's easy. They say it is a matter of, it's like a marathon. You stay there and you stay there and you stay there and you keep going. And even when you're discouraged, you just learn to put it down, and then you pick it up. Something happens in the day. That happened to me. Someone would come into my office, they would say something, and I would go, "Oh, right. Now I've learned." So I learned a great deal about what I've written from people that I work with. I hope they learn from me too, but I think it really is a challenge to stay with yourself and have the confidence to stay with yourself and keep going. I just want to add one thing. That's actually how you get through any of your psychological issues. Yeah, is you keep going. You don't just say, "Oh well, I had this terrible dream and therefore I should stop." No, no, keep going. You'll have another dream that will be more positive. Same thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. And the other thing too, I was just thinking of is, as we look at these people that inspire us, is, they're also struggling in some degree as well. They have someone who inspires them or maybe challenges them to be better. So as much as you look to these people in your life and go, wow, they have everything put together, and you don't really understand what's happening
It's
behind
true.
the scenes. So we're all humans. We're all on a journey.
Absolutely.
So.
I said I was a Jungian analyst, and one of the things that I actually include in all my books relates to Jung's concept of the shadow, which are the parts of ourselves that we haven't used yet, the parts that we don't like, the parts that could be gorgeous, but we don't even know about because they're unconscious, and the parts that we really need to integrate and pay attention to. So it's quite a fascinating topic. And if you think about it, when you go outside and you're in the sun, well, there's your shadow. You can't get rid of it. So you might as well accept it. And that's actually what I write about as well, because I think it's interesting and challenging. And it says, don't be dissuaded by your own difficulties. Go into it more. Go further inside. Yeah.
Okay. So your thread that you kind of weave through the different things you've written around fathers and that side of it is what is the story behind that? Like, why you could write anything about anything, but why is that the one thing you seem to keep coming back to as an author? Why is that so important?
Well, what I come back to is not just the shadow. I use Jungian analytical concepts through all the books because I believe in them. They have meaning for me. And I don't say it to say everyone should believe this way. I also talk about dreams, pieces of dreams, ideas that come through like that, people's ways of relating, difficulties in relationship. But they all relate, actually, to Jungian psychology and promote an in-depth approach to life, which is very not as popular as I would really like it to be. And I think we're cheating ourselves if we don't go deeply into ourselves. But, that's just my opinion. And every one of the books, it's all got a context of Jungian psychology because that's what I've been doing my whole life. So I might as well put it in. Yes.
Yeah. So let's do a little, like a brief overview of the different books you have in the world. Because again, I love when I have an author on that has many different things for our listeners and our readers to fall in love with. Especially I have a lot of first-time authors, their first-time book, and they're on a journey to write more. But you already have a library of things that you can offer to us as a reader. Can you give us an overview? Then we'll go a little deeper into what you're doing.
The first was the absent father effect on daughters, father desire, father wounds. And I wrote about daughters because actually I mostly see daughters. I see a lot of sons, but mostly daughters. And I happen to be a daughter as well. So that's kind of, I think we speak about what we know. And from that, I've always been interested in the imposter syndrome and the as-if personality. So that was my second book, about a year later, the imposter syndrome and the as-if personality in analytical psychology, fragility of the self. And what I mean by the as-if personality, it's kind of interesting. It's a very old-fashioned term from psychoanalysis in the 1940s by a woman psychoanalyst who described these mostly females as very flighty, superficial, no depth. Really, she put them down. Yeah, that's my impression. Not to say she wasn't smart, but she put them down. Her name was Helena Deutsch. And then throughout, there have been some comments in psychoanalysis by different analysts. And then a Jungian analyst named Hester Solomon wrote an article on the as-if personality. So this is how I also increased my writing. And I gave a paper on it, and she was there. And so you get kind of encouragement. And I felt encouraged. Plus, I could identify with this personality, which puts out a great image underneath. I have talked to more people who say, I know I'm a fraud. They're smart, they're intelligent, they're competent, they're accomplished. Whatever their gender is, doesn't matter. And they will say almost on the first session, I know I'm fraudulent. It's a huge thing, really. And if you look you can see it more on the internet, or there's been quite a few books, some books written on it. But it's also, when it's talked mostly about the imposter syndrome, very superficial again. And I deepen it. I say, you know what? There's something that's going on inside there. Fragility of the self, really wanting to strengthen oneself. And that is also a Jungian concept. So there's the thread as it goes. It also entails the shadow, the unconscious, one's dreams. Again, quite similar themes, but worked out with a different emphasis. The third book that comes out in December of this year is The Archetype of Cruella in Analytical Psychology, Girl Unfolding. And it's not a very well-known term, but it means someone who is rather young. Now, this associates to the as-if personality and the imposter syndrome and the daughters, because there's a tendency to not access one's full personality and be treated rather too young. Yeah. And it also is a concept from Jungian psychology. No one ever wrote about it. No one ever even touched it. They talked about it in relation to the male, called the puer, but they're old Latin terms, meaning girl and boy. You can see it in the tale of Narcissus. So Narcissus, quite young, and Echo also quite young. So it's an honoring of people who got caught in having to act too young, partly encouraged through culture. So all the books include our Western culture. They all include issues of the body, how one sees oneself, feels about oneself, dreams about oneself. And then the last one, well, not the last one, I hope, but the one that comes out next year is on narcissism and love, the tragedy of intimacy and isolation. And if you really read the myth of Narcissus, Narcissus is not just self-absorbed, looking in the pool of water. He doesn't see anyone around him, and he doesn't even know he is looking at himself. So when people talk about narcissists, so-and-so is a narcissist, they don't realize the pain inside, the lack of connection with oneself, the disjointedness from body, from people, from life. It's a very serious issue. And that's what I accentuate, is the isolation and the lack of understanding and singularity of narcissism. It's usually mentioned in many references, but psychoanalytic, Jungian didn't talk that much about narcissism, but it's very prevalent in our Western cultures and actually all over the world in a certain way. As the Western influence, I'm not saying it's the greatest influence, but as the Western influence has expanded. So all of them carry not just individual issues, family situations, dynamics, but actually, again, culture and they all contain the body. And I emphasize that as well, because people tend to think that analysis or psychology is all a head trip. It should be also a body trip where you become aware of who you are psychologically and physically, both.
Wow. There is a lot to unpack there. I love this. This is great. The one thing I come across in podcasting, what I do, and talking to authors, is that at times we can play small. We do know things. We do have wisdom and talents and abilities, but we don't want to seem like we are putting ourselves on display, that we're better than someone else, that, hey, look at me up on the stage doing the thing. We don't want to make people uncomfortable by some of the talents that are naturally in us. So we kind of dumb them down, lower our light. Don't be so bright. Don't be so out there. Yeah. How dare you? And that's kind of imposter syndrome. How dare you put yourself out there as an expert in fill in the blank? So then we just play small. We don't want to, we don't want to do that. We don't want to interfere with someone else or make them feel uncomfortable. So we don't put ourselves out there as much as we could. We could help more people if we were more open to ourselves to do that. So for those that are listening to that and they are playing small, right? They're dealing with all the things you've mentioned. Talk to us about that. How do we get past ourselves?
Well, you know what? We learned that, didn't we? You learned it in school, even when you're little, and you want to color the tree purple. And the teacher says, trees aren't purple. Well, some trees are purple. And today they are purple to so-and-so. So why not? And we learn in many subtle ways. Don't be an individual. This is what I like about Jungian psychology. Be an individual who's connected, but be an individual. And I think that there are so many messages of don't. There is another piece. I mentioned this in the Puella. Well, I mentioned it in all of them. There is a prejudice against, if you are of a certain age, whatever that age is, why are you trying? It's like over. No, it is not over. It is not over until it's over, right? So some people get discouraged. Again, talk about being small and believe the old messages. It takes a certain, what would I say? It's kind of like a rebellion, teenage. It takes a rebellion to go, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to tease out all of those old messages. Well, you can't get them all, but a bunch of them. The culture tells us, our families tell us, our friends tell us, and we tell ourselves oftentimes lies, and we underestimate who we are. You're absolutely right. And the other thing that you said about hurting someone, does it really hurt someone if you're doing yourself? If you're not malicious, you're not trying to tear someone down. All you're doing is you're putting up your stand. Well, they can have their stand as well. So you won't hurt anybody. You will hurt someone if you don't, and that someone is yourself. So it's really important to kind of understand what has held one back, listen to it, evaluate it, and move with it and do what you want. Do what you want. So many people don't. Too many reasons of why not, and you were right. It is part of the imposter syndrome and as if personality. I mentioned this in, I think, all of the books. The keeping of a secret, like the secret of your own self, or I'm not going to expose myself, something bad will happen, or that is deadly against oneself. Or I'm not going to write because no one will want it. Well, keep trying. Keep trying. Keep doing it because maybe you have something wonderful to say. And creativity loosens up the psyche. And it makes you more in connection with your energy, your strength, your abilities. your body. It's essential creativity.
I go back to like being in grade school, public school, teacher asks a question of the class, you know the answer. But you're looking around and everyone's kind of looking down at their desk and looking down at their feet. And you're like, right in this moment, I could answer this question and give the teacher what they're asking. But I don't want to put myself out there and make myself look like, oh, look at Dave. Dave always has all the answers. The eye rolls from people like, oh, of course you're going to answer the question, right? But no one else is doing it, But I think in the same space, there might be someone in that room that goes, I wish I could answer that question too. I wish, right? I see that person who puts their hand up and gives the answer and go, I admire that. I want to be like that. But we're so nervous about being the one with the answer in that moment that we just all be quiet. We never put ourselves out there. And we're not growing as a group then, because we don't have someone that we look up to and go, wow, look at Susan out there writing a book. I would love to be like Susan. And you're not writing a book to say, look at me. You're just, I have something to say and I want to use this as my mode of
I think there's another thing. And also I mentioned this in all of the books, and that is social media. So on social media, it can be safe to put yourself out there. But of course, you want to do it in a related way. You want to do it in a way that is, for me, I keep it professional. And I always, I don't do, this is what I'm having for breakfast. Here's my picture. No, but I do think social media has positively, it's got a lot of negatives to it, but positively, it's loosened people to be able to say, I can take a chance because I don't have to look directly at the person. That can also be a bit of a cop-out, but if you become conscious of it, and if you use social media consciously, it can be related. It can also be very dangerous in that we live a virtual reality and we don't live real. And then we have excuses for not being real and never going out of our world. We won't walk out the door. We won't open the doorknob. We'll just stay too locked inside. And there's where I think writing can open up a door as well. You communicate with people. That's what motivates, is to communicate.
I've heard through authors on the show that rejection, judgment, especially on those early works, you talked about that at the beginning of our conversation, where you put something out into the world and somebody said no. But then you took their comments and adjusted.
Yes.
And then they said yes. I think the fear I have for a young author, a new author, is they hear no once and then they never come back. They never try the second time, or they never adjust and learn and grow and rewrite or do the tweaks and then resubmit. They hear one no and they're like, well, I guess I'm not an author. You didn't follow that path, though, right?
No, you're exactly right. But it took me a little bit of time from the no to something changed inside, and then I could approach it. Yeah. So I think it takes a different amount of time for each person. But I do think it's very important to not just listen to someone's no, because you don't know how they're feeling that day. You don't know what happened to them. You don't know if they feel right about it or not. And they should not be the one who's orchestrating your life. So what it does is it strengthens your personality to go beyond no and to say, okay, I'm going to try it again and again and again, and I'll just keep going. It's like you have to believe something in yourself, something. And then as you do it, you get to believe more in yourself. Yeah.
I like having these kind of conversations because you're making me think, Susan. This is what makes me happy, is having someone like you come on the show and you're tickling that part of our brain that we haven't really addressed much, but we need to more often.
We do. But I agree with you. But you are also asking the questions that are, again, in refusal of just going along. They challenge. It doesn't just say, yeah, I just accept. It says, come on, keep going. And that's what I was referring to of it, the individuation. It really takes, I'm going to do it anyway. You have to talk to yourself. But anyway, it should be interesting so that you talk to yourself and you encourage yourself on going along with going farther, not shortchanging. I always think, you know, who knows how many lives we have, but we're inhabiting this one. So value this one and do what you can in it. The other thing I mention in all the books is hope and enthusiasm, because joy, because I think they're important. We don't talk that much about it. We need to. Psychological principles, they're essential as well. You know, the difficult things are essential to figure out, but the positive things as well. It's very important. It gives energy and life force.
Wow. Yeah, one of the quotes I heard, and it sticks with me throughout my life, has been, wherever you are, be all there. In the moment, with your family, with your writing, wherever you are, be all there, not halfway, not partially there, but be all in that moment and live that moment. Make sure that you're very conscious of what you're doing and where you are. And the other part of it too for me is when people are all looking back at social media and then the metrics of followers and likes and shares and all that, instead of trying to create an audience, just create the best you, and your audience will, I'd self-identify as, I like what Susan's talking about. I see what Susan's doing and I want to know more about that. They're going to come to you in that moment because you're doing something you love. And it just shows from what you do and how you write, how you show up, because it's who you are. And then those people are going to identify going, I love what Susan's talking about. I love Susan as a person. And I want more of that. So they're going to come to you just in that moment. That's a better connection than a bunch of random people who may or may not ever connect with you.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we should be looking
I think you're right. I'm going to expand a bit on what you said about presence. Because in all the books I reference a famous psychoanalyst named Andre Green, who spoke about absence and presence. So that's part of the first book is Absent Father. But what the absence is we learn to be absent to ourselves. And our responsibility, you could say, is filling up the absence with our own presence. It's the same thing you said with just different words. So if you're really present, you're not going to feel this tremendous lack that you've got to be filling, that you're anxious and you won't be able to, but you will be working to be in it and feel present. It is not the easiest thing to be present all the time. Most people can't do it. But to be aware of it is so important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I see parents at the playground with their children having a great time running around. They're sitting on their phone and they're not connecting with their kids. The kids are yelling, Mommy, look at me, do the thing. And they're like, yeah. They don't even raise their head to look. They just they're so caught up in whatever they're doing, working on their phone or whatever. And in that moment, there's a missed opportunity, right? So, whatever we can do, again, to be all there in that moment and enjoy those moments, they're not here every day, and you're going to miss some of those, right? So as a writer, you talked about someone coming in your office and giving you something, and you're like, oh, I like this. This sparks something for me. If you're not in the moment, you're going to miss that whole opportunity, right? So be intentional, basically, is what I'm thinking. We need to be more of whatever we create.
I agree with you. And the people on the playground, those little children, one of these days are probably going to be in someone's office like mine. Hey, I remember when I was little and at the game, and my parents or whoever was watching, the caregivers, they were on their phone and they never saw me. So if you're intentional of every minute of your life, which you can't do, but you could try for, it means that people can be healthier as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, Susan, I love a conversation like this. I'm going to be replaying this over and over in my mind all day today. So I love how you show up in this world and how you gently lead and guide us through the conversation. I love how you present yourself.
Thank you. You are a good guide as well.
I take that. I appreciate that. Tell us more about the release date of the most recent book. When can we anticipate being able to support you and purchase this
December 16th of this year will be the one on the Puella archetype, the girl unfolding. The others, you can find me on Amazon or Routledge, any books, wherever, the online. And also I have articles on my website. It's SusanSchwartzPhD.com.
Excellent. As we wrap up, Susan, I would love for you to share with the audience that are here listening and following along. We talked about your community could be here listening and they've read your books, they've been following your journey, but they may have not heard your voice before on a podcast like this, for example. This is their first time hearing their favorite author on a podcast, but they're enjoying the conversation and they love hearing your voice. Do you have any words to your community, your new readers, your new followers that are going to come as a result of the podcast, but also your current and existing readers who really love and enjoy what you do? Do you have a message to your community that we can share as we kind of...
I'm going to go back to a bit of almost our last comment about absence and presence. I think it is just key to knowing about oneself, to being able to persevere, to get through. The recognition of where we are present, how we become absent, and how we become present again. It's a whole process. And I also think it is incredibly important to be oneself. And forget about being like everybody else. Be oneself and who you are with everything that entails. So that's what I would say.
It's great. I imagine someone going out to their car in August in Phoenix where it's hot, going out to the car, putting the key in the car, starting the car, but not putting the car in gear and just pushing on the gas and your car's revving and getting louder and louder and louder. Right. It's not going anywhere. We have to engage. We have to put the car into drive or whatever so that we can actually move forward. And I think maybe some of us are just sitting in the driveway, sitting in front of our house, and we're not going anywhere because we haven't engaged that part of us. Let's move forward in action. And I think what you're writing about helps us to put that car into gear and helps us to get some momentum and get moving. So thank you, Susan, for what you write and how you show up in this world.
Thank you, and thanks for the wonderful analogy. I appreciate being on. Thank you.
There you go. Everyone, all the information for Susan is in the show notes. Would love for you to connect with her, reach out and let her know you heard of her on the show. And when the new books come out as well, go out and purchase, leave an amazing review. Let people know why you love these books so much. The authors do really appreciate to hear your thoughts around their books and what they mean to you. So leave a detailed review for all of Susan's books when you purchase them. And again, Susan, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you. It was a delight. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to How to Do This. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.